Josh Vincent. He's with the Northwest Center for Alternatives to Pesticides. He's come down from Eugene. Quite a long drive to come down here and share this information with us. And I hope you all get what you need out of this meeting and that Josh can answer all your questions. Thank you, Josh.
Okay, can everybody hear me pretty well? Well, I'll start just by saying thanks for coming out and thanks for inviting me. It is a long drive, but it is a pleasure to get to come and speak with everyone. And I also want to thank you for doing this on a weeknight. I know that usually you have these meetings on the weekends, and so I'm sure it was a little bit harder for some of you to make it, but I really appreciate your flexibility there and for making it that much easier for us to be here from Eugene. My name is Josh Vincent. I work with NCAP, which is the Northwest Center for Alternatives to Pesticides. And we're based out of Eugene, Oregon. We've worked here in the Northwest for roughly 35 years now on various pesticide issues. We started back in '79 looking at aerial pesticide spray over public forest land and BLM land and some of the drift issues that arose out of that, where pesticides were landing on people's farmland and on their livestock and their homes and those kind of issues. And then throughout the 80s and the 90s, we sort of broadened our focus a little bit and started looking at pesticide use within agriculture, promoting new forms of agriculture through organics and through use of cover cropping and beneficial insects and various ways to reduce pesticide use. And then looking at pesticide use in urban areas as well, particularly our schools, our parks, playgrounds, kind of places where children and pets go, as well as in housing, and particularly public and low-income housing where residents have very little control over the way that the property is managed. So those are kind of our major issue areas now. So my plan, I guess, for tonight is to talk some, obviously, in general about pesticides, as well as the registration process, because there are some misconceptions about pesticide registration and pesticide safety. And then alternative approaches to managing weeds along roadsides and rights of way, and hopefully some ideas that you can take with you in your dealings with the BPA and talking to them about this project. I mean, I know that your goal ultimately is to have them not be here. So we'll talk some about that too, and maybe some different strategies for that. So I'll start by just going through some terminology and explaining that the term pesticides actually is inclusive of the entire range of chemicals, whether it's insecticides, which target insects, herbicides, which target plants, or fungicides, rodenticides, acaricides. There's really a whole arsenal of things out there that have been on the market for a while to deal with various living organisms that are a threat to crops or to property or whatever. So in talking about pesticides, we're referring to all of those. And what we're going to be talking about mainly tonight are herbicides, but I don't want there to be any confusion here. I wasn't aware of that myself when I started reading about these kind of things. It wasn't until I got more into pesticide issues that I actually realized what the term was. But there's about 1 billion pounds of pesticides applied in the United States annually. The majority of that is within agriculture. It's about 75%. The other 25 is, again, in our urban spaces, suburban spaces, and along roadsides. Most of the highways in the country are sprayed once or twice annually with herbicides and defoliants to maintain visibility, which is actually a requirement by law in a lot of places. So the U.S. Geological Survey did a 10-year-long study that began in 1992 and concluded in '01, where they were looking at our national waterways and testing them for pesticide residues. And they found that in nearly every one, there were detectable levels of pesticides, and many of them above what is considered to be the safe level for human exposure. In Oregon, where we're based, there was a more recent study in 2008 with the USGS that looked at our waterways and found over 60 pesticide compounds. I think it was actually 63 that they detected in Oregon waterways. And then here in Washington, There's actually a state toxics monitoring program, which I think they report annually on their findings. But that last report that they published was in April of 2010. They tested 12 different waterways here around Washington and found pesticides in all of them, as well as other chemicals. I mean, they don't just look at pesticides. They look at PCBs and plasticizers and other kinds of toxic chemicals that result from consumer products and what have you. But they found toxaphene, they found chlorpyrifos, which is one of the herbicides that we're going to talk about this evening, indosulfan, and DDT, which has actually been banned for quite some time now, but it's highly persistent in the environment, and they're still detecting it in our water from years and years ago. So that sort of raises the question, well, okay, pesticides are ubiquitous, they seem to be everywhere, we're coming into contact with them, but aren't they safe? They're legal to use, they're registered with the EPA, so, what is the problem? And that kind of brings us into our first topic, which is pesticide registration. And I know, I talked with Cheryl a little bit about this. The vegetation management plan and the list of approved herbicides that BPA has, of course, they're all registered with the EPA. They're legal for use. But what does that really mean? There are some issues with the registration process, and I think that there are some ideas about what pesticide registration means that may not necessarily be true. So the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, regulates pesticides. And if you are a chemical company that wants to sell a pesticide product, you have to approach the EPA and apply for a registration number. And the EPA will assign a registration number to that chemical so that they can reference that. They publish all of the available research that's public for that pesticide chemical. And they make that available through their website. But it's really a process that has more to do with determining legal label uses for a pesticide. It does not ensure that the chemical being used is going to be safe for people or that it's going to be safe for the environment. It's solely about determining the recommended uses that go on the label for that pesticide. So if I'm a chemical company and I come to the EPA and I say I want to register this pesticide, what they'll ask me to do is to provide what data I have for safety testing on humans, whatever lab data has been done on animals, what the toxicity level is of the chemical, what is its persistence in the environment. And then they take that to generate the label requirements and to assign it to a toxicity category. And I believe there are 5 of those, the 5 being non-toxic or practically non-toxic, and 1 being really toxic, up to we know this causes cancer. There's a whole list of stuff that's registered for use as a pesticide that's out there. That's category 1 toxicity. The EPA believes or knows it to be a carcinogen, but it's legal to use it anyway as long as you abide by the prescribed applications that are on the label. There's also a bit of a problem when it comes to the safety and health data itself. The EPA does not do this testing in large on its own. They do have, obviously, a huge staff of scientists, and they do their own independent evaluations in some cases, but as part of the registration process, the EPA relies on data that is provided usually by the chemical industry that is applying for registration. And so there is some kind of a conflict of interest there. I mean, on the one hand, we want the chemical companies who are applying to sell a product to also be the ones who have to pay for the testing and the research and everything. We don't want that to fall on the public or the taxpayers, but it creates a situation where on the one hand, they want to sell a product, they want to get it registered, and on the other hand, they have a legal obligation, we would argue an ethical obligation, to disclose information or research that they have indicating that a particular pesticide is dangerous, that it causes harm to humans or to the environment or to wildlife. And many times, there's a conflict there. And so, there's a real phenomenon that data gets withheld. Not always the best information is put forward. It is an issue. An example of this is with methyl iodide, which has been in the news a lot lately. If you have read about this, it's a soil fumigant. It's used to grow berries, particularly strawberries, and it's used a lot in California. Methyl iodide was introduced years ago as a replacement for methyl bromide, which is very toxic. Methyl iodide is slightly less toxic, but not by much. At the time, they thought it was better. And so they issued it a registration number, they allowed it for use. And since then, new information has surfaced which points to the toxicity of this chemical. It's registered for use, it's legal to use, it's out there. But it is highly toxic. It's so toxic, actually, that scientists use it in laboratories to do cancer research. They can rely on it to cause cancer in animals, and so they use it to generate cancer cells for study. So this is a problem, and it results in many chemicals being registered for use legally that have serious impacts on our watersheds, on people when it's consumed, and obviously on the greater environment. A separate problem with pesticide registration is what is called conditional registration. And this is when a company comes to the EPA with something that they want to sell or something that they want to market. There has not been adequate testing done on the chemical yet, but they promise to do it, and so the EPA issues what is called conditional registration. And they allow the chemical to be sold under the provisions that they're going to continue to look at. They're going to continue to monitor its effects. And the EPA reserves the right to withdraw the registration if anything turns up that's of concern. Now, this is an issue because it turns basically our larger environment, our backyards, our land, our cells, into a science experiment. I mean, we're the ones that this is being tested on, which is obviously unacceptable. So, a contemporary example of this is clethoanidin, which has been in the news a lot lately as well. And that's a systemic pesticide. They use it on crops to kill insects, but it actually is taken up by the plant root. It shows up in the plant's leaves, in the sap, and the pollen. So it's now causing problems for pollinators like moths, butterflies, bees. It's been linked to colony collapse disorder. Other countries have banned this, but it's registered for use here in the United States under conditional registration while they continue to do testing. So registration is by no means a guarantee of safety for the environment or for people, and it is something that you will get. And going to the BPA or to anyone with concerns about herbicide use, you will hear, we use these pesticides, they're registered, they're tested, they're safe. And in fact, I spoke with Cheryl, and this was the response that was given when you spoke with a word person from the BPA. So I don't say this to rile anyone up, it's just an example. I mean, pesticide registration is about label requirements and not about human safety. So that sort of brings us to what are they using here? What is on BPA's list of approved herbicides? And again, I'm not going to go through all these because there are quite a few, and some of them are actually variations of the same thing. NCAP does not have research on all of these, but we do have research on the more commonly used ones. So we're going to go through about 10 of those pretty quickly. And I'll just share with you what our research shows